In 10 days, Massachusetts residents will decide whether to stop or move forward with the expansion of casino gambling. Like many people, you may have lost the thread in this very confusing narrative, so I'll give you a bit of context. In 2011, the state passed a law that authorized the licensing of 3 casinos and 1 slot parlor. A 5-person gaming commission was formed to oversee this process. And in the past year, the commission awarded the slots parlor license to Plainville, which is on the Rhode Island border. It also awarded 2 casino licenses, 1 to Springfield and 1 to Everett. It's important to understand that in order to apply for a casino license, developers had to get the approval of local communities. 17 of 24 towns, including East Boston and also West Springfield, rejected casinos. Gradually, these local groups coalesced into a statewide effort, which successfully petitioned to put question 3 on the November 4th ballot. In short, the ballot question asks whether Massachusetts voters want to repeal the law that created casino gambling. A yes vote will repeal the law and stop casino expansion. A no vote allows the law to stand and the casinos to be built. Which brings me to today's speaker, Bob Steele. A former Connecticut congressman, author, and businessman, Bob brings a unique perspective to this debate. He is from southeastern Connecticut, which over the past 20 years has become the home for 2 mega casinos, Foxwoods and also Mohegan Sun. By describing what actually happens when casinos come to town, he takes this debate out of the theoretical realm and puts it in a personal and historical context. He has also used this material as background for a novel, which is called The Curse, Big-Time Gambling's Seduction of a Small New England Town. This novel has been very well received, and he has copies of it in the back, which he's willing to sign when the talk is over. Bob will speak for about 20 minutes and then take your questions. Please join me in welcoming him today. Thank you.
Thank you very much, and thanks very much for inviting me to your beautiful church and for the opportunity to talk about this very important and very timely subject. Plenty of seats up here in front. And thank you very much for your interest in my book. The book is indeed The Curse, Big-Time Gambling Seduction of a Small New England Town. The book is a novel set against the explosion of casino gambling in Connecticut back in the 1990s when 2 Indian tribes built the world's 2 biggest casinos in the southeastern corner of our state. The story starts way back in the 1600s when the Connecticut colonists, all of whom had come from here in Massachusetts, got together with their Mohegan allies and defeated and almost destroyed the Pequots, who were the largest and most warlike of the Connecticut tribes. The story then jumps some 350 years as these 2 tribes, the Mashantucket Pequots and the Mohegans, re-emerge almost miraculously thanks to Congress and the courts to build these 2 enormous enterprises. And in the book, a fictional Connecticut family becomes embroiled in a battle to stop a 3rd casino that threatens the family's town and ancestral home. It's a story that I conceived maybe 15 years ago, and I never had any idea that I would actually be able to watch it play out in real life the way it is here in Massachusetts, and unfortunately a number of other towns across the United States. In any event, the book in the end is really a Faustian tale about a small, quintessential New England town faced with a dilemma of, on the one hand, trying to preserve its character and its values, or accepting an enormously lucrative and seductive offer that would change the town forever. And I thought that what I might do this morning is talk briefly about the background to the book and our experience in casino gambling in Connecticut. This is obviously an important time to talk about the subject, because if you happen to repeal the law allowing casinos here in Massachusetts, you will be the first state in the United States to have done that. This is an issue, and this is a contest that is being watched across the United States, I think far more than most people probably in Massachusetts have any idea of today. In any event, this is also a good time to talk about, start talking about Indian casinos, because it's just about the 25th anniversary of something called the Indian Gaming Regulatory Act, which led to this explosion of casinos across the United States. Congress passed the act back in 1988 in order to help poor, federally recognized Indian tribes build casinos on their reservations in order to raise money to support their tribal governments. To be fair to say, however, that Congress had absolutely no idea of the Pandora's box it was opening when it passed this law. Because the law not only opened the door to Indian casinos across the United States, but it led to and spurred the legalization and the opening of non-Indian, commercially owned, so-called commercial casinos across the country as well. When the law was passed back in 1988, there were only 2 states that had casinos. Nevada, obviously, with Las Vegas, and New Jersey with Atlantic City. Today, 39 states have casinos, and America, as a result, is awash in casinos. We now have almost 1,000 of them, just about equally divided between Indian and non-Indian, so-called commercial casinos. And as a result, casino gambling has now literally become America's new national pastime, with more people going to casinos in the United States today than to professional baseball, football, basketball, hockey, soccer. You can throw in any other professional sport you're aware of combined. That's how big it has become, and obviously seeking to become bigger and bigger. Nowhere, though, did it become bigger, faster in the last 25 years than in Connecticut. Foxwoods opened back in 1992. Foxwoods opened in Ledyard, Connecticut, which is my town where I lived. And Mohegan Sun opened 7.5 miles away in the town of Montville in 1996. And with no other competition anywhere on the East Coast, indeed nowhere east of the Mississippi River, except in New Jersey, except in Atlantic City, these 2 casinos, Foxwoods and Mohegan Sun, quickly became the 2 biggest casinos on the planet. And when I say big, I mean big. Foxwoods alone, unless some of you happen to have flown over in a helicopter recently, you have no idea just how big it's become. It's over 8 million square feet under roof. It is bigger than the Pentagon. It is bigger than the biggest office complex in the world. And I give you those figures just so you can have some reference to get a feel for what might have happened had it opened here. In any event, 2 casinos quickly became the 2 biggest in the world, attracting well over half their customers from out of state, mainly New York, Massachusetts, Rhode Island, but from all over the Northeast. They created 20,000 casino jobs and began to send hundreds of millions of dollars a year to the state treasury in Hartford. Now, your officials here in Massachusetts, especially during the 2011 debate, but it actually started before that, repeatedly cited these spectacular numbers from Connecticut's casinos to use as rationale for legalizing casino gambling here in the Bay State. But one has to wonder, especially as we sit in Connecticut, how many of your officials have looked at what's been happening in Connecticut recently. The casinos, first of all, have created a pervasive gambling culture in southeastern Connecticut. They've sharply skewed our economy there toward low-paying service jobs, and they've resulted in a sharp spike in the number of Connecticut residents seeking treatment for gambling addiction across the state of Connecticut. One of the most intriguing and disturbing statistics to come out of a 2009 State of Connecticut sponsored study was that since the casinos had opened, there had been a 400% increase in Connecticut in the number of arrests for embezzlement, a rate of increase 10 times the national average. Actually, one of the embezzlers was my tax collector in Legend. She stole $302,000 from tax receipts. I never knew whether mine were among them or not, but I always assumed they probably were, in order to play the slots at Foxwoods. And of course, she didn't win, because over time, nobody wins. Statistically, it is impossible to win when the casino takes 9 or 10% of everything you bet. Indeed, as I did the research for my book, and I would sit with card dealers and other people who work the casinos, and I would always ask at the end, what do you think about your job? How would you describe your job, what you do in life? And they would tell me all have the same common denominator, and that was, well, basically, my job is to keep you happy while you lose your money. The number of arrests for embezzlement in Connecticut since the casinos opened has been so great that a columnist for the New London Day, our largest newspaper in southeastern Connecticut, has described southeastern Connecticut as the embezzlement capital of America. And these embezzlements, incidentally, just to give you a feel, aren't just every once in a while, and they aren't just a few miles from the casino. Perhaps you read about our most recent one. It was a national story back in June when it went to court. It seems that the chief financial officer of the little town of Winchester, Connecticut, if you know Connecticut, it's up in the northwest corner near Massachusetts and New York. And the little town of Winchester, Connecticut, the chief financial officer managed somehow to steal over $2 million from the town over a period of 4 to 5 years. It was an embezzlement so great that it brought the town of Winchester to its knees. Right up until Christmas time, it was talking about having to close the school system in Winchester because the town had run out of money. As far back as 1997, Congress, which had opened the door to this casino explosion, became so concerned about what it had done that it set up a national commission to study the issue. The National Commission worked for a period of 2 years looking at the impact across the country. And they made a number of recommendations when they finally got through with their work. And none of those recommendations, however, were ever implemented. You might be interested in what some of them were. The first one was that there be a moratorium on the building of new casinos across the United States until the federal government could get a better handle on the social and economic costs. The commission also recommended, and if you've been to a casino recently, you get a kick out of this, the commission recommended banning credit card and ATM use at casinos, which is an integral part, of course, of their business. It recommended prohibiting aggressive casino advertising, which of course we now see every day on television. And they recommended restricting political contributions by the gambling industry in order to guard against political corruption. None of these recommendations were ever implemented, not only because of opposition from the casino industry, but from opposition from states, such as your own state of Massachusetts, who didn't want to kill the golden goose, or potentially the golden goose. None of these recommendations were implemented. And as a result, in the process, the casino industry since then has become an enormously powerful group. They've become a $67 billion industry and one of the most powerful political groups in the United States. The industry contends, and I don't have to tell you this, all you have to do is read the Globe just about every morning, or watch television every day, and watch the ads. The casino industry contends that casinos spur economic development, that they create jobs, and that they send much needed money to states and municipalities. Opponents, however, have long argued that casinos, in fact, do far more harm than good. They begin with the facts, apropos to this morning's sermon, they begin with the facts that gambling is addictive for millions of people, and that gambling addiction leads to debt, bankruptcies, broken families, and crime. Second, they reject the contention that casinos promote economic development. Pretty big deal, because that's what the whole thing is being sold on here in Massachusetts and across the country. In Connecticut's case, the opponents point out that casinos have done almost nothing to create spin-off businesses, but instead have cannibalized existing businesses and left people with less money to spend on other goods and services. A very good example of cannibalization. You hear the word, it kind of rolls off your back. But let me give you an example of cannibalization. I had a very good friend who owned one of the most successful restaurants in southeastern Connecticut. And I remember how excited he was the day that Mohegan Sun opened about 2 miles up the road. He was certain that with all of these people coming up from New York and down from Boston and over from Albany and over from Providence, surely hundreds of these people would stop at his restaurant every single month, maybe to have lunch before they went to enjoy the casino, maybe to have dinner on the way home. Surely some of these 20,000 employees would want to take a break at some point, maybe at the end of their shift, would want to come in and maybe have a drink at the bar, or maybe have a bite to eat after a long, tough day on the gambling floor. I remember that it took exactly 28 months for him to decide to close his restaurant. And I remember so well what he told me the day he told me he was going to close it. He said, Bob, I cannot believe how naive I was about how the casinos work. But now I understand. People drive to the casinos, they play at the casinos, they go to shows at the casinos, they stay at the casino hotels, they eat at the casino restaurants, and then they fill up their gas tanks at the casino gas stations and drive home. It's an all-consuming experience. We, as local merchants, rarely, if ever, see any of these people. Third, opponents say there's very, very little evidence. Again, no matter what the casino industry claims, very little evidence that casinos ultimately strengthen a state's or a municipality's finances. Connecticut, they know, receives 25% of the slot machine revenues that come from the casinos go to the state treasury in Hartford. That has provided the state of Connecticut with over $6.5 billion over the last 20 years. Over $6.5 billion. Yet Connecticut today is in the worst financial shape in its history, with the slowest job growth, the highest debt per capita, and the highest unfunded liabilities versus state GDP of any state in the United States. And now, an independent, nonpartisan group of scholars and public policy experts from around the country, assembled by one of America's leading think tanks, the Institute for American Values, has recently published a report on the impact this casino explosion has had on the United States. It's not just Connecticut, this is on the United States as a whole. And I thought that since this issue is so important here in Massachusetts at the moment, you might be interested in their findings. And they're quite to the point. Once an occasional and largely upper-class activity, casino gambling has moved from the margins to the mainstream of American life. 2, today's regional casinos are different from traditional Las Vegas-style casinos that catered predominantly to well-heeled players who came from long distances away and preferred table games. In other words, you had to fly to Las Vegas to play at the casinos, or take a long drive down to Atlantic City to play at the casinos. In contrast, the new casinos are primarily slots barns, filled with a whole new generation of highly addictive slot machines, and cater overwhelmingly to middle and low rollers who live within an hour away, return frequently, and play the slots. 3, modern slot machines have transformed American gambling. This is a whole new game. This is not the game that most people think it is or was. Slots are no longer the one-armed bandits that we all tend to think of when we think of a slot machine. If you've been to a casino lately, you know the slot machines don't even have arms or handles. They are, in fact, modern computers designed by many of the best brains in America, and they actually tether you to your credit card or to your account. You don't even have to put in any money. They'd be happy to have your credit, they'd be happy to have your bank account. According to a new MIT study by a brilliant young professor at MIT by the name of Natasha Scholl, these new slot machines have become, as I say, modern, sophisticated computers, engineered to create fast, continuous, and repeat betting, designed to get players to play longer and therefore lose money over time. Perhaps some of you have seen her book. It's very aptly titled, Addiction by Design. 4, while casinos represent themselves as benign entertainment companies, they are in fact predatory businesses that depend on problem gamblers, that is, people with some level of gambling addiction, either pathological or problem gamblers, for 40 to 60% of their profits. So when the casino industry tells you, well, you know, not that many Americans develop gambling addiction. Only about 10 million Americans, maybe another 15 million Americans who are at risk for gambling addiction. Many of them, of course, here in Massachusetts. But don't worry about it, it's only 1 to 5% of the population. And yet the casinos get 40 to 60% of their profits from these 1 to 5% of our population. 5, living within 50 miles. Do you think you're safe? It's going to be in Boston, or it's going to be over in Springfield, or maybe in Taunton, or maybe on the way out on Martha's Vineyard, who knows. But living within 50 miles, according to the report of a casino, doubles the chance of developing a gambling addiction. 6, casinos constitute a regressive tax that hits low-wage earners, minorities, and the elderly the hardest, thereby contributing to economic inequality in America, a term we're all becoming very familiar with. A term, obviously, was one of the president's favorite terms, but even the Republicans now have adopted this term, a term of great concern. And incidentally, you might be interested in knowing who are the fastest, or which segment of the population is thank you very much, is the fastest growing segment of addicted gamblers in America. The elderly. The elderly. And within the group of senior citizens, women. Women aged 50 to 85. Why? Because they're particularly attracted to slot machines, which is increasingly what this is all about. They like slot machines because they're able to gamble in isolation. Nobody has to know about it. And for the most part, they don't want people to know about it. Secondly, they love the security at the casinos. Excellent security. At least until you walk out into the parking lot, excellent security. And they like the hospitality. The casinos are especially hospitable to senior citizens. Just look at the bus loads that come in, pour into Connecticut every single day. Thanks. In fact, the new term for casinos is daycare for the elderly. So increasingly, that's how we're taking care of our elderly. Grandma, why don't you go and spend a day at the casino? And the casino is especially welcoming because there are free glasses of wine. There's great hospitality, especially when the Social Security checks come out. 7, state sponsorship of gambling is a conflict of interest for state governments, such as your own, that are established to promote the general welfare, not prey on tens of thousands of their most vulnerable citizens. In sum, according to this new report from the Institute for American Values, the long-term costs of the new regional and local casinos exceed their benefits by 3 to 1. They drain wealth from communities, weaken nearby businesses, and reduce volunteerism, civic participation, family stability, and other forms of social capital that are at the heart of a successful community. Now, despite the costs, the conventional wisdom has been that Connecticut's casinos have been a net economic plus initially for the state of Connecticut because of the large number of people who come from out of state and leave their money in Connecticut. So this is net new money to Connecticut. And that's the only way a casino can help an area, even begin initially to help an area. That's why, obviously, Las Vegas gets its money from all of these people coming into Las Vegas. Connecticut got its money from people coming into Connecticut. But that game is over, or it is almost over. It is in the 9th inning. The regional monopoly, for example, that allowed Connecticut's casinos to attract all of these people from out of state is basically over because of the enormous saturation of the casino market that is taking place in the Northeast and across the country. When Foxwoods, think about this, when Foxwoods opened back in 1992, there were only 10 other casinos in the entire 12 states of the Northeast, and they were all 250 miles away in Atlantic City. Today, those 12 states have 57 casinos, soon to be 77 casinos, depending on what happens there in Massachusetts and in a number of other states here in the Northeast. As a result, and the reason I have them is state after state, inviting the casinos in order to get a piece of the revenue so that the politicians don't have to say they raise taxes. As a result of the growing competition, particularly now from Rhode Island's Twin River Casino down in Lincoln, Rhode Island, and from Aqueduct and Yonkers racetracks in New York, where they have enormous electronic slot machine casinos. Connecticut's slot revenue is plummeting. It's already down 35% from its peak, with the state government share falling from $430 million a year to under $280 million a year. It's now been down for 32 straight months, and as I say, is plummeting. Connecticut's casinos are laying off employees and increasingly replacing full-time jobs with part-time jobs in order to reduce wage costs and get rid of medical benefits. And Foxwoods has now had to stop any kind of profit distributions to its tribal members because there are no more profit distributions. It continues to be deeply in debt and has already defaulted now on over $1.5 billion of its debt. The same thing is happening in more and more states across the country. I know I've already talked to people here who are from Louisiana, people who are from West Virginia. These are all gambling states. These are all gambling states where you're starting to see the same kind of thing happen. And any of their, let's stick to the Northeast. In Delaware. Delaware, just this year, has already put over $30 million toward bailing out its 3 casinos in order to forestall layoffs. In other words, the casinos are becoming like the banks, too big to fail. We need the casinos now because they employ so many people. And you know what's happening in Atlantic City. Atlantic City started this year with 12 casinos. They've so far closed 4. A 5th one is threatening to close unless they reduce their taxes on the casino and employees take wage cuts. New Jersey now, Atlantic City has lost over 9,000 jobs just this year. So you can see what happens when it starts down. It's great the first couple of years. The money pours in. It's true almost all over the country. And then it begins to turn. And that period is being compressed and compressed and compressed. It took 15 years in Connecticut. With all this saturation now, you're seeing it happen in 18 months, 2 years, 2.5 years. In any event, Connecticut's casinos say they have, despite this, they have no intention of sitting back and watching all this competition eat their lunch. They say what they intend to do is upgrade their properties and add all kinds of new attractions to continue attracting in as many people as possible. But it's very, very unlikely that with more and more people having casinos in their own backyards, that many people are going to continue driving all the way to eastern Connecticut to gamble. And as a result, our casinos have no choice but to increasingly turn inward and attract more and more people that come in to gamble in order to keep full the gambling establishments that we've created. Now, that means more social and economic costs, obviously, for us in Connecticut. But I know what many of you are thinking. You're thinking, well, you know, you guys in Connecticut, actually look at all that money you took in for those first 15 years. I mean, isn't it our turn in Massachusetts? But it's very hard to believe that your experience here in Massachusetts would be or will be any different from ours in Connecticut. It's just that the whole thing will be compressed from a time point of view. Your casinos here in Massachusetts may choose to call themselves destination resorts or destination casinos for out-of-towners and out-of-staters. It's always about out-of-towners and out-of-staters. That's whose money you're going to get. But the proliferation of casinos across America and increasingly across the world. Incidentally, you know the first thing that Mr. Putin did when he took over the Crimea? They declared the Crimea a casino zone, to build casinos to try to attract high rollers, just the way Boston and Springfield and Taunton, etc., want to do. In any event, this proliferation of casinos is turning almost all U.S. casinos outside of Las Vegas into simply convenience casinos, and that's the term, convenience casinos for people in nearby communities and neighborhoods. There's also another very important lesson that we're learning in Connecticut, and that is that once the initial success of the casinos begins to fade, as it is certainly now doing, and gambling revenue begins to decline, as it will certainly do, you can expect your state of Massachusetts to try to replace it by encouraging still more gambling. In response to our declining casino revenue in Connecticut, Connecticut recently increased the casino's free play allowance so they could beef up their promotions and attract more people to come in and play. And Connecticut tried to introduce Keno. I know you already have it in Massachusetts, but there was such a negative reaction to it because of our experience with gambling that the governor and legislature had to pull it back. But that did not deter our legislature. Earlier this year, the legislature began hearings on legislation to open 3 new major video slots casinos, not parlors, casinos in Connecticut. One in Bridgeport, one in New Haven, and one in Windsor Locks at Bradley International Airport. All of these initiatives pale, however, compared to what our state, and I assure you, your state will have in store for you next if you go ahead and bring casinos into Massachusetts. Nevada, New Jersey, and Delaware recently legalized online internet gambling for their casinos in order to help their casinos compete and defend their customer bases. Connecticut's governor wants to do the same thing in the state of Connecticut. And whether you happen to know it or not, there's already been a bill introduced in the Massachusetts legislature to bring in online gambling. Of course, it's sitting aside. They haven't done anything with it yet because they're waiting for the vote to take place to see if you first get in physical casinos. So in other words, we in Connecticut, having to become dependent, so dependent on physical casinos, we're now being told we have no choice but to begin to consider legalizing online gambling. And as one expert in Connecticut put it, doing that would be the equivalent of opening a 24-hour casino in every house, every apartment, and every dorm room in our state. And the impact would be, the effect would be the same here in Massachusetts. The big difference, of course, would be that you have a lot more dorm rooms. Foxwoods and Mohegan Sun want online gambling because they want to get to a younger audience. We know that young people today are technologically primed for online gambling. The casinos want it because they want that audience. They're dying, salivating for that audience and that customer base. The addiction experts are particularly concerned about it because they say online gambling is the most addictive of all forms because of the fast pace of the games, the constant rapid gambling, because of the 24-hour availability, and because of the instant gratification aspect of online gambling, which I'm told is particularly attractive to younger people. The further massive expansion of legalized gambling across the country, across the Northeast, across New England, and Connecticut is a daunting prospect for those who think we already have enough of it. In fact, for me, it was enough to want to write a book. Thanks very much. I will be happy to try to answer your questions. Yes, sir.
So the question, I don't know all the background, but at some point, I think our governor's changes, I think he was opposed to the casinos, and then he supported anybody, when it could be happened that changed.
You're a governor here in Massachusetts?
Yeah, I thought he was opposed to it a couple of years
Well,
ago.
what happened in Massachusetts is there's been an effort for the last 20 years to get casinos into Massachusetts. It was always the governor and the Speaker of the House who blocked it in Massachusetts. You got a new Speaker of the House, you got a new governor, they're both for casinos, thought it was a great idea, and they're the ones who, the governor signed the bill, and the Speaker of the House pushed it through the Massachusetts legislature. Now, it was interesting that, that your governor was asked recently what he would think about bringing a casino into his hometown in western Massachusetts. He said, no, he didn't think that would be a good idea. But it's a good idea for your town, but not for his town. And this is true. This is true about most gambling proponents, and especially gambling entrepreneurs and owners across the country. One of the most famous incidents was the former, he just left office, but he's former head of the American Gaming Association, the AGA. And he was asked, actually on television, and the anti-gambling people love to show this on television. He lives in a very Tony neighborhood in Maryland, just outside of Washington, D.C. And he was asked exactly that question. Well, what would you think about bringing a casino to your town, which is near Bethesda, Maryland? No, he said, that wouldn't be appropriate for our town. So I'm afraid that your current political leaders in Massachusetts are very much in favor of casinos. In fact, both the Republican and Democratic candidates for governor in Massachusetts have made it very, very clear that they would not vote for repeal. They would vote against repeal. One of the candidates has said that he's not sure about the Boston casino, but he certainly thinks they should go through with the one in Springfield, which incidentally is the worst idea of all. That's going to be a disaster for the poor people of Springfield. But in any event, I'm afraid the answer is that the leaders of the repeal effort do not include most of your major political leaders in Massachusetts. Some, not all. Yes, sir.
Me?
Well, I'm sorry, I can't see. Yeah, I'm sorry.
That's okay. What kind of crime has resulted from these casinos?
I'm sorry, could you ask that again?
Crime.
What kind of crime has resulted?
Crime. Well, as I know you know, Las Vegas got its start thanks to the mob. Las Vegas was totally controlled by the mob. Since that time, however, corporate America and the government have taken over, and they pretty much pushed the mob out. Now, that's not to say, so who needs the mob when we've got government, and we've got hedge funds and public corporations that want a piece of this action. Now, having said that, at the same time, organized crime is always attracted to where the money is. We know that. And in Connecticut, and I'll speak to Connecticut, in Connecticut, the mob, and especially the patriarch crime family based in Providence, has been very, very active in trying to piggyback on the casino. They run scams at the casino. As a matter of fact, in my book, a very important part of the book is a scam that is run at one of the casinos, and that's true across the country. There's no question. I mean, casinos are used for money laundering. They're used for all kinds of things. I'm not sure if you're asking about crime in the local community or you're asking about crime in the as far as organized crime is concerned. But as far as the local community is concerned, the crime, I think, has over the years, the kind of crime you think about, larcenies and muggings and that kind of thing, is really leveled off. I mean, we've been at it now for 20 years. However, the economic crimes, such as, I talked about embezzlement, an enormous increase in embezzlement, the bankruptcies, economic problems. I mean, we could spend the next 2 hours, I could tell you stories about people, I mentioned the tax collector. Here's a woman who had absolutely pristine record all her life. Tax collector in the town of Legend, a leading vote getter. Casino comes in, within 3 years she's in prison because she's developed a gambling addiction. The leading accountant in Eastern Connecticut, a tremendous business, stole millions of dollars from his clients. I go down to the judge in Westerly, Rhode Island. I could just go through it over and over and over again. The problem is most people don't have any idea of what is happening beneath the surface. They see the glitzy casino, it looks like fun, they got some great restaurants, they brought a celebrity chef in, and they did this and they did that. I thought I knew this subject backwards and forwards when I finished the book. And what I've learned in the last, since I've been speaking on this subject, is people have come up and told me their stories. I realized that I only understood the surface on the extent to which and the number of people and families it impacts is just enormous. Most of those things don't come out in the crime statistics. I'm sorry, I thought I saw. Well, let me conclude then by one of the questions that I frequently get is, why did you write the book as a novel? Why didn't you write the book as a nonfiction book? And the answer to that is we've already had 3 very good nonfiction books about the rise of Foxwoods, because it was the biggest casino in the world for so long, and it was a great national story. And but what I find is, and those were nonfiction books. What I find is that even many people in Eastern Connecticut don't really know the story of what happened or what the full impact has been. By the time I get out of Eastern Connecticut and I get to Massachusetts, nobody knows the story. I get to Maine, certainly nobody gets the story. Or in New York City, nobody knows the story. And I hope that I thought that if I could write an exciting novel, story, people love stories. If I could write an exciting novel set against the factual background of what happened, I could put a human face on what happens when a casino comes to a community. So thank you very much for having me. It's an honor to speak here, and I'll be happy to continue to answer your questions and be happy to sign books for anybody who'd like me to do that, and I appreciate the invitation. Thank you.